He walked into his own restaurant wearing a thrift store jacket and another man's name. He planned to be invisible, a ghost at a table, a pair of eyes taking notes as if numbers could save anything. Then he saw her on the back steps, shoulders shaking, mascara leaving inked fingerprints on her apron, and the lie he'd prepared cracked like a plate dropped in a crowded room. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're watching from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1. The gray jacket, the sign over the door, anchor and ash, glowed tiredly against the dusk, the neon flickering in a heartbeat rhythm. Inside, the air was a warm breath of charred lemon and rosemary, a grill's hiss that sounded like rain. Elias Hart paused on the sidewalk, tugged the brim of his cap lower, and checked his phone. He had practiced the cover story in the car. Name, Nate. Business, traveling rep for an artisanal vinegar company. Purpose, dinner alone. The host, a young woman with eyes that flicked like a sparrow's. He would ask the kind of questions customers ask. Is the charbroil smoker always this smoky? Does the aioli have garlic? Is the bar still making that ember whiskey? He'd told his assistant not to call him for 48 hours. The board thought he was at a donor gala. The mirror at home had reflected a 54-year-old man who'd named a restaurant group after his mother's favorite poem and built it into a national chain, then watched his CFO slide a spreadsheet across a long table with a proposal so clean and gleaming it felt like a blade. Sell. The hedge fund would keep the brand and gut the people. That's how the numbers worked. He was late to learning, he knew, that numbers are not the same as truth. He had already seen the girl crying, out by the dumpsters where the sour, sweet smell of old citrus and damp cardboard clung to brick. He'd been on his way to the back entrance, where he'd planned to listen to the kitchen without being seen. Her shoulders shook, her knuckles pressed to her mouth, a phone screen bright against her cheek. Hey, he'd said before he could stop himself, then caught the stupidity in it. There are no good words for a stranger's tears. He held out a crumpled napkin and an unopened bottle of water he'd taken from his car. You okay? I'm fine, she said and lifted her chin like a blade. She was young, 24 maybe, and the name tag pinned to the breast pocket of her black button-down said Maya. A small gold cross hung on a chain at her throat, half hidden by the collar. I'm on my break. But her mouth trembled like a child's. Breaks are for breathing, he said quietly. It helps. He set the water on the step below hers, nodded, and would have retreated. But the metal door opened with a slam that scattered cigarette ash, and a man in a tie too tight strode out, power posture, jaw clenched. Rios, the man barked, the syllable like a stain on something white. Back on the floor, table 12 hasn't seen you in, what, 10 minutes? We're not running a charity. 2 minutes, Maya said, swiping at her eyes. Please, I had to take a call about. No, not a request, he snapped, then noticed Elias, scanned him up and down, and mustered a customer smile like stacking plates on a cracked shelf. Sir, we'll get you seated right away. Elias smiled, the way he'd been taught in boardrooms and diners alike. He used to be good at being invisible. When his mother worked the opening shift at an all-night diner, and he sat at a corner booth with homework and toast crusts, and the knowledge that she was watching the whole room to make sure no one noticed her little boy sleeping. He nodded at Maya, motioned toward the door. I wouldn't want to be late for the show. The manager clapped his hands twice, rehearsed pep. Let's hustle, team. Inside, Anchor and Ash was the kind of place Elias used to promise investors would feel like a heartbeat, light pooling from fixtures like overturned bowls, the bar's backlit bottles like stained glass. The music was low, couches by the windows soft as confessionals. Servers moved the way dancers move when they know all the steps but the floor keeps shifting beneath their feet. Over the open kitchen, the heat shimmered. The smell of char, kaffir lime, butter basting. Table 6, the hostess asked, menus already in her hand. Is that okay? Perfect, he said. He had the kind of face that slid off memory. He could walk through a dining room like a ghost. He sat. He laid the menu flat, but he wasn't reading. He was listening. The manager, Curtis on his name tag, though Maya had said Kurt, was barking like a drill sergeant by the pastry case. Push the ember whiskey. If they say no, ask twice. We are not in the business of not selling. At the next table, a family of 5, kids with crayons, a father checking his email and a mother with worry lines like parentheses. Near the kitchen, A couple on what looked like a first date, nervous laughter spilling like water out of a too-full glass. A man in a suit at the bar with a wedding ring he kept turning with his thumb. A booth near the back where three teenagers still in baseball uniforms whispered and grinned, the smell of their sweat, grass and dust and youth, like a memory of a summer Elias had long ago promised himself he'd make up to the son he never had. It was a Thursday. It was any night. Meyer approached his table. The tears had retreated, the smile was the kind you sew onto your face and hope it holds. A thin strip of gauze circled her ring finger, a burn, maybe. Good evening, I'm Maya. Can I get you started with a drink, sparkling or our? Water, he said gently. And whatever you recommend that tastes like home. She tilted her head, wary. Where's home? He hesitated. Pretend this is a game, pretend you know how to lie. A house where the kitchen smelled like melted butter and soap, where the clock ticked loud enough to count off shifts. She looked at him a long moment. Our chicken pot pie is too pretty for its own good, she decided, but the mashed potatoes taste like somebody's grandma forgot not to use real cream. She scribbled on her pad. You sure about the water, the ember? Water's good. Okay. She pivoted away to a table of 20-somethings in dresses they couldn't quite afford, where someone was craning toward the kitchen with a phone. On the wall above the bar was the framed, flattering, exasperating photo from a magazine Elias had agreed to years ago, his face tilted toward light, the tagline under it, "The man who built home." Every time he saw it anywhere, in the corporate office lobby, in the Denver location's hallway by the bathrooms, here, the shame punched him, as if it were true, as if he had kept any promise but the ones he'd made to numbers. He stole an idle glance at his phone. No messages. He went to open a notes app to record what he'd seen and stopped. His hand moved instead toward his jacket pocket, where a folded piece of paper lived, creased and soft from being handled too many times. He had read it in an airport months ago, read it on the floor of his living room after a night where sleep wouldn't come, read it in his car before walking into his board meeting to talk about exit strategies and EBITDA. He pulled it out now as if it were a talisman. Dear Mr. Hart, you don't know me. I don't expect you to. I just need to try. I love this place. That's the problem. Some of us love it so much we stay even when it feels like it's trying to make us small. We use our own tips to cover the cost of bread that goes out burned because the manager says someone has to pay and it's never him. We get scheduled to close at midnight and open at 7, and if we ask for Sunday off, if we say we have a little brother to take to a doctor's appointment, we get told we're not committed. I know this isn't what you wanted. Is it? I scraped the words off a poster in the office with my fingernail and took them home. We take care of our people. I brought them with me because I wanted to remember they exist. I don't want to quit. I want to believe. Meyer R., he didn't know then what prompted her to write, or whether she had addressed it to him because she'd seen the smiling magazine photo in the foyer and believed he was a person one could appeal to. Maybe she'd written and thrown it away and written again. He had asked his assistant to find which restaurant the letter had come from, but it had arrived without a return address. The envelope had been smeared with something like flour. He had kept the letter anyway, like an apology he'd forgotten the words for. He slid the letter back into his jacket as Maya returned with the water and a basket of bread meant to be free but too often tallied as a server's expense when something else did not balance. Over her shoulder, Kurt was leaning into the ear of a bartender, voice bright and tight. The bartender laughed, worried, and poured. How's your night? Elias asked, because he needed to hear it in someone else's voice. Busy, she said, automatically. Then, perhaps because he hadn't looked away, perhaps because she had already cried and there was a kind of relief in not pretending, she added, My brother's asthma is acting up. The after-school program closes at 6. The friend I asked to pick him up is stuck in traffic. If I leave early, I'll lose my weekend shifts. That's double tips. So, busy? I'm sorry, he said. She nodded, blinked hard, and swallowed. At least they fixed the AC. Last week the kitchen was so hot we were all dizzy. She stared at the burn on her finger as if it were a map. If you need anything during your meal, look angry when you need me, she added softly. Certain tables get priority. People who look angry get seen, he asked. And people who look like they can tip 3 digits, she said, that exhausted, truth-teller humor that made Elias love this industry and want to rescue it from himself. I didn't make the rules. No, he said, but someone did. He watched her move away. The kitchen door swung open again and again in its metal frame. He listened to the drumbeat of orders the head cook, Noor, called the overlapping choreography of sauté pans and grill claps. On the counter, plates slid like sacrament across the pass. He saw, too, what the customers did not, the grease film that limned the hood, the kind of thing people skip because the cleaning budget has been slashed by an algorithm and the quarterly report needs to shine. He knew better. He knew because he'd done it. Table 12 wants the Ember whiskey, Kurt said. All of them. 8, you'll make your numbers tonight if you don't screw it up. We're out of the good rye, the bartender said. We got the rail stuff, I told. Use more smoke, Kurt said. They won't notice. At a table near the window, a man in a paint-splattered hoodie took a sip and made a face his girlfriend didn't see. He shook his head once, then smiled when she looked. Things like that. So many things like that. The accumulation of small betrayals. Chapter 2, Heat and Smoke. The fire started as a flare, not a blaze. Noor, hair pinned back in a kerchief, tipped brandy into the pan to flame the mushrooms, the golden arc like a comet. The fire licked higher than it should have because a slice of fat had fallen beneath the grill, and the extractors throbbed, stuttered. When the flare didn't die down, a few customers clapped, drunkenly, the way people do with a spectacle they think is for them. Kurt did not look up. Maya did. She was at a table scraping a candle blob off a wood tray with the edge of her nail, smiling, nodding at a story a man was telling about his dog. She saw Noor's eyes and stopped smiling. The kitchen lights flickered, and the air made that sound a room makes when everyone realizes at once they have been telling the wrong story about what is happening. Noor swore. The hood. Thought maintenance came last week, the grill cook said, but the words were already gilt. They came, Noor said, coughing. They signed a paper, that's all. A coil of flame unrolled toward the hood. The extractors should have shuddered to life, should have swallowed smoke like a beast swallowing shadow. They stammered instead. Elias stood up because the body moves before the mind can write a memo. He had installed a system in his head that went, see, solve, save. Not out of nobility, but because he had grown up in a place where if the grown-ups stopped moving for even a second, the bad things found them quicker. Hot, black smoke curled toward the ceiling. Someone screamed. The restaurant went from comfortable noise to animal sound. Kurt jumped behind Noor and cut the gas. Everyone outside, everyone now. Fire extinguisher, Noor barked, already reaching for the red cylinder bolted by the prep table. She yanked. It stuck, paint gluing metal to wall. She pulled again with her whole body. The metal shrieked. The teenagers in baseball jerseys stood at once, chairs scraping, then knocked into the next table, and a toddler cried, and the toddler's father swore. Elias moved toward the kitchen, faster than a man his age with bad knees should, and was surprised to find the fear he felt was not fear for himself. He saw Maya with her hands on a child's shoulders, pushing him gently under the smoke, which does not care about rich or poor or polite or angry. He saw the manager trying to herd people through the front. Back door, Noor yelled. Use the back. Kurt grabbed the extinguisher from her hands. I got it, he said, and then didn't. His hands were shaking. He pointed the nozzle wrong. The foam roared and splattered, slicked the tile. Elias, read the little pictures because training manuals stick in your head. He took the extinguisher from Kurt with a sentence he would regret later. Let me. And told the cook to pull the pin, aim at the base, squeeze, sweep. They didn't do it perfectly. The heat baked his skin, a dry pain that would bloom later. But they knocked the flames down enough for Noor to slap a sheet pan over the worst of it, starve the fire of oxygen, and when the hood exhaled, belated, coughingly, the room sighed like a giant. Maya's hand burned where she'd grabbed the wrong part of the extinguisher a moment before passing it. She didn't let go. She guided an old couple whose steps had turned small to the patio. Her eyes seared. She held her breath and realized, with the cruel clarity of emergency, that she could not save everyone personally, but she could get them out one by one. The fire alarm whooped too late, but it whooped. Sprinklers stayed silent. Elias's head filled with a bright, hard anger that felt like grief. You wrote the contracts, he told himself. You cut the maintenance budget to optimize. You said the words, operational efficiency, like they could wash sin. By the time the last table made it out the front door and the firefighters clomped in, the flames were only smoke. A man outside coughed dramatically into his sleeve like a character on a bad TV show, then posted online anyway. People took pictures of themselves near the fire truck, mouths shaped like wild. Noor sat on a milk crate in the alley, face in her hands, shoulders shaking. The teenagers in their baseball jerseys stood in a group and realized they might be heroes if they told the story right later, which is its own kind of human thing. Elias looked for Maya. He saw her near the host stand, pressing her burned hand to her apron with a sort of stubborn pride that made his throat hurt. Kurt was in her face. "Why didn't you keep?" he was saying, and then caught Elias's eye and swallowed. "Guests calm, we trained for this." "I did," Maya said evenly. Her voice shook anyway. "I sat on a trash can so Mrs. Henderson wouldn't fall. I pulled Rick's little girl under the smoke. You used the extinguisher wrong," Kurt snapped. "You could have made it worse. Sign this." He held out a clipboard. He held it the way men hold ropes they think are leashes. "What is it?" she asked, only the slightest tremor betraying the fear that had lived in her body for months and had nowhere else to go. "A write-up," he said. "Standard." "For what?" Meyer asked. It was a question more people should ask. "Leaving the floor," he said. "Not following direction, you can write your comments." Elias took a breath, felt the old restraint roll up like a shade and stick. He had learned to hesitate in situations like this, to gather context, but his body moved before policy did. "You're writing her up for helping people out of a fire." He asked. "You want that in writing?" Kurt turned to him, eyes cutting. "Sir, this is a private matter. Please step aside." "I'd like to speak to your corporate rep," Elias said. "Now." Kurt's jaw made a noise like teeth grinding. "There's no need to, sir," Elias said, very quietly. He didn't raise his voice because he had learned how to do worse things with a whisper. "Call your area director. Call whoever you need to call." Kurt stared at him, and Elias saw the calculations flicker, the photo on the wall, the cap, the thrift store jacket, the fact that he did not look like a person who mattered. He saw the manager decide. "I'll take care of it," Kurt said, and snapped the clipboard back, like he'd been the reasonable one all along. He did not take care of it. He retreated to the office in back and shut the door with a click that meant, "Keep out, the way we're hiring." Sign means scream into a void. Meyer exhaled, then inhaled too sharply, and the breath snagged on her cough. Elias stepped closer. "Let someone bandage that," he said, nodding toward her hand. "It's fine." "It's not." She slid a splinter of a smile toward him because she had learned that deflecting kindness was a kind of kindness. "Thanks for what you did. I remembered the pictures on the extinguisher." "That helps," she said. "Pictures are the best part of training." Sirens faded. Nor stood, wiped her eyes, and squared her shoulders like a captain. "We'll have to close for the night," she said, to no one and everyone, like a prayer you speak because you have to say something to fill what would otherwise be silence. Kurt came out of the office and clapped his hands, businesslike, as if he hadn't just wanted to leave a mark on someone with paperwork. "Half pay for the night," he declared. The room moaned as one. "We lost sales." "We almost lost a roof," Noor said, flat. "Policy," Kurt said. "Policy," Elias repeated, a taste like pennies in his mouth. He went out to the alley and leaned against the brick, the neon sign flickering a last exhale before it went dark. He thought of his mother's hands, raw from hot plates, how she rubbed Nivea in at night, blue tin clacking on the nightstand. He thought of how he'd told himself that building this chain would be his apology to her, the way he'd repay. He'd built a machine that, when it ran smoothly, could feed 1,000 families. He'd also built pressures so tight that people like Maya cracked teeth on them. He reached for his phone and typed a text to his assistant, "Find me the maintenance contract for the hood at Anchor and Ash, Newbury Street. Also, all write-ups in last 6 months. Also, see if anyone ever forwarded a letter from a server named Meyer R." He paused, then added, "and hold Monroe. No calls for 24 hours." He went home to his hotel and lay awake staring at the ceiling. Chapter 3. The second shift he came back the next day wearing dish gloves rolled in his back pocket, under a name he did not own, because watching a thing break from the dining room was one thing, seeing who cleaned up afterward was another. "Corporate sent you?" Noor asked, skeptical, eyeing him over the coffee urn as if he were a trick baked into the cake. Her hand was bandaged too, a smear of silver ointment showed at the edge. "I'm supposed to train on dish for a few nights," he said. "They call it an undercover evaluation. I call it Mop Hospital." He tried to grin the way guys who are not new to this work grin, the bones in his face resisting. Noor snorted but nodded. "We can use the help." "You always can," he said. Kurt looked at him as if he were a loose screw. "Make sure he signs the temp paperwork," he told Noor, then stitched on a smile for the bar back. "Half off family meals tonight if we make our hourly." "Do we get family meals?" the busser asked, confused and wanting to believe. If we hit the number, Kurt said. He didn't explain what happened if they did not. Behind the kitchen, the dish pit was a metal cave of steam and clatter. Plates came back with lost bits of hunger clinging to them. The sprayer felt like a weapon in the hand. The machine roared. Elias fell into the rhythm that lived in his muscles like a ghost memory from summers in high school, when he washed dishes at the copper spoon and came out smelling like grease and lemon. He liked this work because it was honest, dirty stuff in, clean thing out. He had made his life a puzzle of complicated levers because he got addicted to the dopamine of problems solved. There was a quieter joy, he remembered, in work that just ends for a minute before it starts again. He watched the people too. Maya wrapped her burned hand in a latex glove and worked double, even as she favored it, even as she redirected drunks with smiling steel. Noor pulled double duty as line and counselor. Raoul, the dishwasher who normally worked this pit, told him stories about how he used to build houses in El Salvador and about a dog he'd named Whiskey because he'd never tasted the real thing. The bartenders made jokes they couldn't say in front of the host. There were 2 new kids who went pale when someone said the word, tip out. Between orders, Elias took a detour toward the back office. He had learned to wear a posture that said you belong where you are. He slipped inside when Kurt went out to choose someone else. The office smelled like microwaved noodles and cheap cologne. On the wall, the We Take Care of Our People poster, edges curling. On the desk, a spiral notebook, a lockbox left ajar. Inside, folders labeled breakage and complimentary and walkouts. The breakage ledger recorded every dropped plate and burned soup as a staff debt, tallied and remarkable. Servers were expected to cover the loss out of their tips. He flipped further. A certified letter from the city's safety department, hood maintenance overdue. A maintenance company's invoice stamped, paid without dates filled in. He took photos on his phone. He could feel his pulse in his throat. Looking for something? Kurt asked from the doorway. Elias didn't turn quickly. Ice scoop, he lied. Saw someone bring one in here last night by accident. Weird place for it. Kurt's mouth made a line too thin. Stay out of here. You should stay out of here, Elias said, gentling the words with a laugh. Isn't that what they teach us? If you're in the weeds, beg for another pair of hands, and if your ego won't let you, let the weeds finish you. Best training manual I ever read. Kurt eyed him. His gaze slid, not landing. The bet in his eyes was still that this man in a gray cap and dish gloves had no teeth. There was a rumor before the night was half over, a whisper that felt like weather. The area director was coming in. It traveled like a different kind of smoke through the restaurant, and everybody straightened something, a table, tent, their hair, their fear. Maya caught it and set her face. Linda Price is here, Kurt announced, smarm bright as grease. Let's make her proud. Linda walked in wearing a blazer that cost more than most people's paychecks and a smile that looked like a shape memory wire. She beamed at Kurt and air-kissed, then adopted a pleasant face to sweep the room. She did not see the bandages, though she looked at them. She did not see the ledger numbers running like speed on a back of house chalkboard. She read the nightly sales like scripture and pronounced them better. She pulled Kurt aside by the pastry case, voice pitched to be heard by the important people and not by the rest. We dodged a bullet last night, Linda said. You know that, right? If there had been injuries, the optics were pre-sale, we need clean. Under control, Kurt said, and his hand went to his tie. I took care of it. We'll spin it as a team rally. And the server? Linda asked, an afterthought snapping into her mind like static. Which? He asked. There were so many servers you could almost forget they weren't quantity but names. The one who made a scene, Linda said lightly. I'll address it, Kurt promised. It's already on her file. He meant the write-up he hadn't filed because a stranger had cut in. Maya collected her end-of-night receipts like she was gathering evidence. Her mouth was thin, her eyes tired. Elias watched her head toward the office and followed feral instinct. It was a thing you make a person do alone if you want to teach them fear. In the office, Kurt held his red pen like a scepter. Breakage, he said, and pushed the ledger toward her. Extinguisher foam damaged 3 plates and 2 side plates. Debited to your tab. She stared at him. You're charging me for putting out a fire? His voice was soothing the way snakes are smooth. You should have waited for direction. Every second counts, she said. Noor taught us that in safety training. She glanced at Noor in the doorway. Noor's jaw clenched and unclenched, floating muscle. Sign, Kurt said, or I take your weekend shifts. Nor took a step forward. That's not policy, Kurt. She pointed to the poster in a way that would have been funny if it weren't a small tragedy. We take care of our people, he laughed. We take care of our numbers. Linda stood behind him in the door, nodding slightly at the ledger like it was a thing grown-ups did that children didn't understand. The world cracked with the noise of a little bone breaking that had been strained for too long. I'll sign under protest, Maya said, pen clenched whitely. Don't, Elias said. He heard his own voice the way you hear a bell you did not plan on ringing. A silence fell that made Curtis's lip curl. You're the dishwasher, Kurt sneered. Shut up. Elias took off his cap. Someone behind him made a small sound like a laugh and then strangled it. He had seen this moment before on a TV show he didn't like because it made everything too tidy. It was not tidy inside him, but he could not stop the thing happening. He stood just tall enough that the room felt his height, and he let his voice fill the space he had been withholding. My name is Elias Hart, he said. He didn't say, I sign your checks, because that sounded like a threat. He said, I own this place. The room did the thing rooms do when a truth lands you didn't prepare for. Nor blinked, the bartender's mouth opened, Maya's breath hitched like a hiccup. Linda's smile did not fall so much as it rearranged. Kurt's face cooled and then flushed. You're joking, Kurt said, half laughing. Do I look like a joke? Elias asked, and he knew the hurt in the question was for himself. He nodded toward the photo on the wall. Apologies for that. Linda recovered first. Of course she did. Elias, she said, voice smooth as a clean plate. We've been meaning to get you out to visit. You picked a dramatic night. I picked a normal night, Elias said, softly enough that it made them all listen. That was the problem. He set the ledger gently aside and turned to Maya. You don't sign that, he said. Nobody signs that, Kurt stammered. It's standard. No, Elias said. It's a theft of wages, and it's illegal in this city. Linda's eyes flicked to Kurt like a slice. Of course, she said. We've been telling everyone that breakage policies aren't strictly aligned. Strictly aligned, Elias repeated, and had to swallow and laugh at the same time or he would have broken a chair. From this minute forward, here and in every store with our name on it, breakage is the cost of doing business, not the cost of being a server. You watch a plate fall and you add up your losses, it comes out to a decimal. You take someone's rent because their hands slipped in steam, you're stealing. Nora's eyes filled because she hadn't had time that day to be the person she was. The relief in her body was not dramatic. It was the kind that makes you sit down. And you, Elias said, looking at Kurt. You are on leave until further notice. HR will talk to you about the tip pool and your lovely ledgers. Security will escort you from the building. Kurt laughed like a man who's discovered his house is made of sugar. Excuse me, Linda put her hand on his elbow. Kurt, she said, let's step outside. No, Kurt said. He can't do this. Monroe said. Monroe doesn't sign your checks, Elias said, because he was angry enough to be petty. He was also suddenly tired beyond telling. He turned to Maya, the room's buzzing a body of bees. You wrote me a letter, he said, his voice gentler. He took it from his pocket and held it like an apology. I read it every day for a while. She stared at the paper like it might bite. That was months ago. I know, he said. I'm sorry. You read it, she said, her voice rising, then steadying like a hand on a rail. You kept it, and you did nothing. He could feel the room tilt toward this new thing, this truth that hurt worse. I thought, he said, and stopped because thought was a coward's word. I delayed. I didn't ask you to be a hero, Maya said, a tear sliding down and stopping at the edge of the bandage. I asked you to see. I see, he said. It was not enough. He did not ask for forgiveness, because there are times you don't ask for a thing you cannot earn. From the doorway, Linda cleared her throat and rallied. Elias, we should discuss how this revelation affects our sale timeline. We're not selling, Elias said, with a calm he felt like a fever. The words surprised him. They surprised him the way a person says no and hears it ring in their body like a bell. Not now, not like this. If the only way we can sell is by hollowing out the people, we built the wrong thing. Linda paled. The board will hear from me in the morning, he said. Tonight, everyone gets full pay. Everyone gets a hot meal before they go home. The hood gets fixed tomorrow. The write-up policy is revisited. And the sign, he pointed at the We Take Care of Our People poster. We either mean it or it comes down. And me, Kurt said in a voice that had nothing big in it. You, Elias said, tell the truth tomorrow to HR under oath. Kurt laughed again, but it was a laugh that ended in a cough. He walked out and Linda walked with him, hissing in his ear in a voice that would leave no bite marks but plenty of fear. In the quiet that followed, someone clapped very softly because they didn't know what else to do with their hands. Nor handed Elias a plastic fork. "Family meals spaghetti," she said. "For the record, the sauce tastes like grief, but it's real." He swallowed a laugh and a sob and nodded. "I'll eat." He sat at a back table with the staff. He ate spaghetti with a fork that bent if you pressed too hard. He watched people watch him the way animals watch weather. He felt the burn on his fingers bloom and knew it would blister. He thought, there is a cliff ahead and I have just turned the wheel. He thought, there are things I can fix and things I can't. After the plates were cleared, he found Meyer in the alley where smoke still lingered like memory. She was seated on the step again, head back against brick, eyes closed. He sat a respectful distance away. "Thank you for the letter," he said, when she did not open her eyes. "I didn't write it to thank you," she said, and then opened them to take the sting away. "I wrote it because my brother has lungs that don't understand business decisions. We couldn't afford his prescription last month because the tips were short, because I had to pay for a broken plate." "That is not a story you put in a newsletter." "What's his name?" Elias asked. "Leo," she said. "He's 10. He's brilliant at building Lego cities he never gets to show anyone because I'm always late. He knows the Spanish words for all his inhaler parts. He hates that his school cafeteria always smells like ketchup. He thinks I'm brave. I'm not. I get scared and talk out loud about nothing." He could feel, suddenly, the hand of a younger version of himself tugging at his sleeve, pointing. "Look, look." He had built a machine and he had called it a promise. He had let other people drive it. He had been busy doing what he told himself were necessary things. He had drifted into a life where people like Maya were the ones under the wheels when the machine hit a bump. "What if we made a fund?" He said, "It came out wrong, it always does at first. For emergencies, for prescriptions, discretionary and fast." She kept her eyes on the sky. "I don't want charity," she said, each word a tooth. He nodded. "I learned that line from my mother," he said. "She wanted a system that didn't need charity. I want one too." He took a breath. "There are structural things I can change, wage schedules. Scheduling, benefits. If you tell me there's a supervisor I don't see when I read the numbers, I'll see him." He looked at her bandaged hand, at the crosses etched in the brick. "I can't promise a miracle." "Good," she said. "I don't believe in them." "What do you believe in?" he asked, she thought. "People doing the thing they say in the poster," she said. "A door that opens when you push it." Schedules posted a week before. "A boss who doesn't take my tips, being able to take my brother to his checkup without begging." "Okay," he said. "Help me build that, not just here, everywhere our sign hangs." She laughed, a bark of it. "You want me to fix your company, does it come with dental?" He grinned. "We can talk about dental," he sobered. "I'm not asking you to do my job. I'm asking you to tell me when I am doing it wrong." "Okay," she said after a while, in a voice that was not forgiveness but willingness. "I can do that." Chapter 4. The long day the next day smelled like coffee and newly scrubbed. The Hood Company arrived with sheepish apologies and a team that looked like it did not usually get greeted by a CEO with a bitten lip. The HR team arrived with combed hair and forms and an eagerness that looked like fear disguised as professionalism. The regional director did not return. Kurt handed in his badge and lost some of his spine on the way out. He would make a show later, of course, but for now he was quiet, which was its own apology. Elias canceled 3 meetings and invited Noor, Raoul, the old hostess with the sparrow eyes, Maya, and 2 others to the office. He asked Noor to bring a list of what she would fix if she could. She handed him 6 pages. He asked Raoul what would make Dish feel like less of a punishment. Raoul said, "A radio." He asked the hostess what she avoided doing because it scared her. She said, "Asking for help." He asked Maya for everything. She gave him a piece of paper she had folded 3 times. "Scheduling," she said. "You say we'll get our schedules by the week before. We don't. If my brother gets sick or the school wants a signature, I beg shift swaps." One time Kurt scheduled me to close and open 6 days in a row. When I asked for Sunday morning because the clinic is open Sundays, he said people who love their families should work somewhere else. You know the feeling of sitting beside a 7-year-old in an urgent care and your phone buzzes with "Where are you?" And you say, "We're in a place with dinosaurs on the wall and not enough air," and they say, "Your shift starts in 20? He swallowed. "Yes," he said, even if he had never known it exactly. She continued. "The tip pool, transparent, no skimming, no breakage, no walkout taxes unless security fails. And for the love of God, stop making us put photos of the menu items on our social media and not paying us for it. Nor laughed. Amen. And health insurance that doesn't punish us for using it, the hostess added, in a quiet, sharp voice. He nodded and wrote. He sent emails to payroll with language he wished he'd written a decade ago. He drafted a letter to the board full of words they would hate and words they needed to hear. He called Monroe and told him to wait, to let him explain in person why the sale had to fall apart. Monroe swore without swearing and said words like fiduciary and breach, and Elias said words like integrity until they both hung up a little sick. He knew he was lighting fuses he might not be able to stomp out. At lunch, he stood by the host stand and took the hits. A regular wanted a free dessert for last night's trauma and also a reservation to impress his boss. A woman said she'd never come back with the resignation of a person who will come back. A man shook his hand and said, "Way to take care of your people," as if every witness to a small right thing becomes a shareholder in virtue. He slipped away mid-afternoon to the pharmacy down the block and asked for an inhaler by brand name. The pharmacist asked for a prescription. He remembered that life is not that easy. He bought a gift card anyway and slid it under the door dash envelope. He knew housed the emergency cash envelope, because you learn a thing when you watch, as long as he had watched. He wrote Leo on the outside and stopped himself halfway to writing a number too big to be human. He set it down and walked away. Maya found the envelope, read his handwriting, and marched into the office. "What is this?" she demanded. "Help," he said. "A try." She put it on the desk and pushed it back like it was a hot plate. "No, make the schedule right," she said. "Fix the hood, pay Nor what she deserves, then come to my house and play Uno with Leo while I take a nap." He put his hands up. "Fair. Be a person about it," she said. "Not a story." He nodded, chastened and a little relieved. It was easier to do the official thing. It was harder to be the kind of man whose help you wanted to accept. Chapter 5, Ripple's change is slow until it isn't. 3 weeks later, a server at the Akron location noticed that the schedule posted on a Sunday had the following Sunday blank and emailed to ask if that was allowed. The next day, 5 more emails like it arrived from 5 different cities. HR created a portal for scheduling violations and cursed quietly. Management training materials changed a sentence here and there, and then whole paragraphs. A supervisor insent. Louis quit when told he couldn't keep the walkout tax. A manager in Phoenix tried to fight and discovered the photos that Elias had time to release to the larger staff of ledger entries like Kurt's. The damned, stubborn culture that had grown like mold in the corners went to war with the change, and the change stumbled. And then a woman in Omaha posted a photo of her kid at soccer with a caption. "I got to skip a Saturday shift for the first time in 3 months. My boss said family first and meant it." The thread was shared across a private employee group like a secret handshake. The board had half a mind to bury Elias. They called him into a room with a long table and a coat rack full of expensive regrets and asked him if he'd lost his mind. He told them he'd finally found it. Monroe tried to cut him off with talk of legal exposure and cost. He responded with photos of a little boy's inhaler and a burned hand and the ledger's crooked math. He gave them a new spreadsheet, one that counted retention and recruitment, and the cost of not being sued and the cost of not being monsters. They breathed through their teeth, and a few of them looked at their hands. You do not fix a house by painting the porch. He knew that. He also knew that sometimes you throw open a window to let the gas out and apologize later to the neighbor whose curtains blow crazy. The day the new policies went live, Elias walked into Anchor and Ash to find the "We Take Care of Our People" poster gone. In its place was a framed piece of brown butcher paper with handwriting in a dozen inks. "We're not a family. Families forgive too much. We're a crew. Crews take turns holding the rope." Nor wrote that line. "We clock out for smoke breaks and don't judge the clouds in other people's heads." Raoul, who had a way with words. "Schedules posted by Sunday. If it's Tuesday and you don't know next week, yell," the hostess, fierce now. A line lower in neat, small letters. "If you see something wrong, write a letter. We find one another when we write. Maya." Elias stood under it and felt a thing he hadn't felt in a decade settle like a coat over his shoulders. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But belonging. Chapter 6. The twist that wasn't. People asked later if Meyer and Elias became friends, if she adopted him as a father figure or he adopted her as a cause. That wasn't what happened. What happened was more stubborn and more real. She said no when he offered to drive her home once. She said yes when he asked if he could stop by with a stack of Lego people he said he'd found in his closet, which was a lie, but a necessary one. He met Leo, who showed him a city built of plastic with a hospital at the center, and a diner at the corner, and a firehouse from which brave, tiny heroes were forever running. He sat on the floor and pretended a firefighter needed an extinguisher lesson, and Leo rolled his eyes and said, "Everybody knows how to do that." He watched Maya set her jaw as she paid the electric bill, and then softened when Leo hugged her. And he recognized every woman he'd ever known who kept a house together, with taped-together thoughts and a calendar app. He invited Maya to a meeting with the corporate training team. She wore a thrifted blazer and shoes that killed her and told the assembled mangers that customer focus did not mean fear. She said that upsell could mean suggest something that fits what they want, not talk like a robot about the Ember whiskey as if everybody in the world needs to be on fire at dinner. They wrote her words on dry erase boards with squeaking markers and said, yes, a lot, and then did not follow up enough. She did not shape into corporate. She shaped corporate into momentary reality and then went back to her shift. She returned to nursing school on a scholarship the company announced for service staff seeking degrees in care fields. The scholarship was named after Elias's mother, but he asked the board to also put another name on it, small and quiet, Rios. If you didn't know, you didn't know. If you did, you felt the heat of a hand held out. She worked nights and studied mornings. He stopped by with tacos and did the dishes and learned not to call it help. He called it, yo, I'm here, and sometimes she rolled her eyes and sometimes she cried because sometimes you cry when someone is decent after too much time where people were not. Kurt filed a wrongful termination claim and did an interview with a blog that called Elias the restaurant world's last moralist, which was meant to be an insult. No one read it. Linda took a leave, which stretched into something else. She sent an email that said she had been following policy and had not meant harm, and she wrote to Noor privately to say she had been wrong, and sometimes that is the best you can ask. The chain's numbers did not explode. They stabilized. There were ugly months. There were better ones. The sale did not go through. 2 board members resigned. 2 new ones joined. The world spun. People ate chicken pot pie that tasted like butter and soap and somebody watching you to make sure you had enough gravy. Chapter 7, a letter. Again, she wrote him a letter again in a June that melted onto June's shoulders. Dear Elias, you told me once to tell you when you were wrong. I didn't expect to want to tell you when you were right. Leo can run now without coughing. The new AC doesn't wheeze. Noor's daughter got braces on the company plan. Raoul listens to his radio and sings along, and we make fun of him. The bartender quit smoking because we have a policy now to let people take mental health breaks as long as they are honest about it, and he said honesty tasted better than nicotine. I am not saying it's perfect. There's a new manager who smiles too much and believes in us, and still sometimes forgets that tips are not a personality trait. There's a customer who screams at me for 20 minutes because his burger had an opinion. There are nights I go home and put my hands in ice and wish my mother were alive to tell me to quit. There are mornings I listen to lectures about human lungs and think about how air moves like smoke and like patience. But there is a door in my head that feels unlocked now. Leo says hi. He says bring the Lego next time you come over because he wants to build the restaurant with you and Minnie, and he wants to put a tiny fire extinguisher on the wall next to the stove. He says he wants to be a person who helps. Your poster came down. The new one makes me laugh. It would have made your mother proud, I think. Come check my dosage calculations for me. You're good at pretending to be a student, I hear. He read the letter at his kitchen table with eggs cooling on his plate. He thought of the first letter and how it had burned in his pocket and not moved him fast enough. He thought of how slow change is, how fast you can screw up, how sometimes the only heroism you get to practice is showing up again the next day and taking out the trash because it smells like old lemons and like your own regret. Chapter 8. The last night 2 years later, he stepped down. He announced it at a quiet staff meeting, not at a press conference. He said there were other hands. He said a name, Noor Rahman, as the new VP of Food and People, and there were whistles that embarrassed her and claps that embarrass nobody. He handed the reins of the company to a woman who'd started on the line and built systems that were not machines so much as communities. He stayed on as something he could live with, a man who could be called for the hard call, a man who could be yelled at when someone forgot their nose ring policy again, a man who could show up with a mop and not die of pride. His last night as CEO, he went to Anchor and Ash for dinner, alone. He did not try to be anyone else. The host put him at his favorite table anyway. The photo of his magazine face was gone. The butcher paper plaque with handwriting was still there, but there was a frame around it now. Maya came to the table in scrubs under her jacket, a pin on her chest from the hospital that said RN, and another, smaller one, that said crew. Her hair was pulled back, and she looked 10 years older and 5 years younger at once. She brought him bread and sat without asking because they knew each other as best as two people can who met in a fire. You did it, he said, and he meant everything with those 3 words. He meant her, the degree, the lungs. So did you, she said, grudging and kind, and he took it like a person who knows he doesn't deserve praise and needed it anyway. They ate pot pie and laughed at a child who tried to escape his booster seat and succeeded. A homeless man sat at the end of the bar and ate soup without a check being rung because a line on the rule sheet said, "Community meal, 1 per night, no questions asked," and no one made a speech about it. Raoul danced a little as he loaded plates. Noor came out to the dining room and got hugged by a woman with braces, who lifted her lip and grinned. The ember whiskey tasted like somebody had finally figured out that smoke is a spice, not the whole recipe. After the meal, he went out to the alley where the brick still held the story he'd walked into. He stood there and listened to the city. Maya joined him, arms folded against the night. "Do you remember what you said to me the first time we spoke?" she asked. "I said breaks are for breathing," he said. "Yeah," she said. "You were right about that. Take a breath, you're off shift," he laughed. The sound came out like something taken off a stove at exactly the right time. He would be asked in the months to follow to tell this story 100 times on stages with good lighting and mics that didn't pop. He would always start it the same way. He wouldn't start with the fire. He wouldn't start with the reveal. He would start with a girl on back steps and a bottle of water and a manager who had learned to be cruel because a system rewarded it. He would say, "I walked into my own restaurant and saw someone crying, and I thought I was going to be the one who changed everything. Then she told me a truth, and I realized I was the one who had to change." People would clap politely. They would cry in the right places. They would go home to places where the posters on their walls said true things they did not live. He would not control what they did next. He would control, more often now, the unlocked door in his own head and the list of small things that, done every day, make a place feel less like a promise and more like a home. Years later, Leo would come in after a shift at his first job and sit at the bar and order soup on his discount and tell the bartender he wanted to be a person who helps. Maya would schedule her shifts around nights at the hospital, where she held hands as air went in and out of lungs that were human in their unfairness and amazing in their stubbornness. Elias would sit in a booth with his grandchild on his knee and teach them how to fold a paper napkin swan, because some legacies you build with your hands and some you build by not letting go of the rope. The sign over the door, Anchor and Ash, would glow better, the neon steady as a promise. Inside, the air would smell like char and butter, and this, finally, would be true. They took care of their people. Not perfectly, not always, but openly, insistently, stubbornly. Outside, in the alley, someone would sit on the step after a long shift, breathe, take a drink of water, and for once, nobody would tell them to hurry up. They would let them be a person whose work mattered and whose rest mattered too. The night would fold around the building like a warm napkin. The stories would travel. They would land in hearts like sparks landed in pans, bright, brief enough to see by for a second. That's all a life asks sometimes. A second of seeing, then the next, until you call it by another name. Home.